board. So again, Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, I hope the Minister will be able to provide us with some of the details that we're looking for. I know I've been asked by some parents at home, again, with no details available, it's practically impossible to provide them with the answers they're looking for. So again, with those few comments, Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity.
Recognize the Minister of Education. Close debate on 268. Now, Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I'm rising on my feet to close debate on second reading of Bill 268, the Pre-Primary Education Act. I'd like to thank the members opposite for their interest in this bill, and although, to be quite frank, I think a certain amount of their debate was not really directed towards the bill nor its principles, it was nonetheless, I guess, on occasion interesting. Mr. Speaker, and I'm going to answer a couple of questions. And members, member from Kings West, the member from Clare, both emphasized, as did the member from Dartmouth South, Portland Valley, yes, that it was a pilot program, and I think it's very important for people to keep that in mind. It is an opportunity for the Department of Education and the Department of Community Services, as well as interested parents and other organizations, including members of the daycare community out there, which have come up from time to time to make an accurate and a fulsome evaluation of the benefit of this program. The member from Clare said, as did the member from Halifax Clayton Park back some time ago, asked why there is legislation. There's legislation, I guess, for two reasons. I don't like to seem trite. As I told the member from Halifax Clayton Park, not on the floor of the House, one of the reasons there's legislation, quite frank, is I was told by our legal people that we needed it. And that probably was, if they give me that advice, then normally I do adhere to it. Secondly, from a practical point of view, as everybody knows, the Education Act talks, and the conditions of the Education Act apply to children who were 5 on or before September the 30th. And therefore, if we were to introduce sort of another public program into the public schools, the suggestion was that we have to make sure that it's seen apart and separate from the regular public school. And therefore, it would be most appropriate to have standalone legislation. It would make it, you want me to keep going?
Yeah, just a couple minutes.
The standalone legislation so that there would not be confusing this with the public school program, because clearly it's different. It's different because it is intended, as the member from Kings West said, it provides opportunities for children in a number of areas to prepare them for learning when they get to school. And I think it was the member from Dartmouth South, Portland Valley, who has had some experience in this field, and I believe has been 10 years as school board member. I think she told me that, and if I remember correctly, Mr. Speaker, when I first met her, she may have been president of the Nova Scotia School Boards Association. So that was, for her, a long time ago. Me, it was very fleetingly. But
a mere girl.
A mere girl at that time. But the thing is that for youngsters to gain the most out of their first formal year in school, the primary year, if they can listen, if they can work in groups, and for those of you who heard the interview on CBC this morning with the Elmsdale experience about, and I see the honourable member from Halifax Clayton Park nodding her head, and clearly the feedback from those who were involved in this program, granted it's only been operating for about 2 months, were indeed positive. And if the first indication is to follow through, then what is being done has been a good thing for the young people that are enrolled, and also it's supported by the parent group. And Mr. Speaker, this is our intent. When school boards made the decision about where these pilots would be placed, and there are 19 pilots, 14 of which are operating now, I think one of the things that members of the House would recognize that, and be quite frank, this is what we encouraged in the Department of Education, is that people move slowly to ensure that when they put the pilot there, they get it right. Rather than if they didn't feel that they were ready to go September, whatever it was, when the school year began, then we encouraged them, to take their time and do it in a way that would see everybody gain the maximum benefit, and all the structures that would be put in place so that an appropriate evaluation can be done by both early childhood educators and the education community. One last thing I want to mention, Mr. Speaker, before closing debate on this, is simply that we do recognize that the discussion about transportation is an issue. We knew that when we began. We had that discussion on a number of occasions with the school boards that were going to implement the program, and that's clearly something that has some problems with it, but we're confident that we can work our way through that. Mr. Speaker, again, I want to thank the members opposite who participate in this debate, and with that, I would like to formally move second reading of Bill number 268.
Motion is for second reading, Bill 268. Is House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 268, entitled An Act Respecting Pre-Primary Education.
For the Committee on Law Amendments, the Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 252, the House of Assembly Act?
Bill number 252. House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, this amendment to the House of Assembly Act negates the requirement for you, Mr. Speaker, and the Internal Economy Board to put in place a commission to examine the salaries and allowances paid to members of the House of Assembly. And, Mr. Speaker, it puts in place a 2.9% annual increase for members, which is based on the 2004-2005 salary increases for the civil service. The Speaker moves second reading.
Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to join the debate this evening on this bill, and I have just a few things I wanted to comment on. I realize this is moving on to law amendments, and certainly all of us over the past number of days since this bill has been before the House, and as other matters have been examined, I guess, by the media with respect to MLA's pay and allowances, have found themselves in the uncomfortable position of looking at the way in which we receive our remuneration. And I want to talk just briefly about this particular bill, because I believe that this bill represents, in part, what is the right thing to do with respect to remuneration and the way in which we are paid. It is a bill that comes before the House that is open for examination by not just the members of this House, but in fact from the people of the province. And it's open to the media and to people to cast a pass judgment on whether or not this is the appropriate thing to do. And I know I've seen, as many people have, the editorials that have appeared in the newspaper with respect to MLA's remuneration and whether or not this is the time that it should happen, and whether or not it's enough, or whether or not it's too little, and all of that. And it becomes a difficult thing for us as legislators to deal with, because we are in a very unique position. We are in the position, Mr. Speaker, where we end up having to pass legislation that is going to materially affect our own financial well-being. And for most of us, and I think perhaps for all of us, we find that to be an extraordinarily difficult position to be in from time to time. Simply because I think that most people who come to this House, I really don't know any member of the House who started off by saying, well, the first thing I want to know in running for election is what it is I'm going to get by the way of remuneration. Most people who come to this job, who come to the job of public service, come to it because they have a genuine belief that they have something to contribute to the life of their province. And I will defend before anyone the honor of participating in this profession. I believe that those people who come to serve the province of Nova Scotia do so primarily because they believe that it is a worthwhile undertaking for them to take, either in opposition or on the government side. It's not, I don't think it's for us to shy away from these questions when they are positive. Now, I know over many years, the way that this developed was that a commission was appointed and recommendations were made. And what we found out from that was that even though that process was designed to be arm's length and was designed to try and bring forward unbiased recommendations that could be seen to be of a transparent process, in many occasions, they just didn't end up being passed because the legislature would become consumed with whether or not this was the right time for those recommendations to come forward, and often, in fact, didn't follow the recommendations of the commission that was set up to determine exactly that matter. So all of that has led to some difficulty in dealing with this issue. I've heard the Premier say that he is committed to bringing forward a mechanism to examine what I think is the fundamental point in all that, and that is transparency. That what it is that members of the legislatures receive, either in remuneration or in allowances, is done so in a fashion that the people of Nova Scotia can understand. Not just the amounts, but also the process by which those amounts are arrived at, what they're intended for. And I know that many people out there, for example, Mr. Speaker, don't understand at all what some of this is about. I know somebody came to me and said, well, what is a franking allowance? I have never heard of a franking. What is a franking allowance? And I had to explain to people that this is the way that allowances are made for bulk mailings into the constituencies. That if a member wants to reach all of his constituency, to publish a quarterly report or a semi-annual report, the way that mailing takes place is through that kind of an allowance. And in fact, I would argue, Mr. Speaker, that is an important aspect of the accountability process that most members of the legislature engage in. They want to be, they want their constituents to know what it is that they are doing on their behalf. You know, a lot of our constituents live very busy lives, and as much as, you know, we like to think, Mr. Speaker, that they're out there watching us on television and that they're reading the paper about what we're doing, and that they know that we're every day in here fulfilling the function for which we were elected, the reality is that the vast majority of our constituents don't know what it is that we're engaged in here in the House, or what pieces of legislation we're championing, or what we are engaging in terms of debate on the various pieces of legislation that come before the House. And the only way that we get to communicate with our constituents is by having the ability to do that in a direct fashion, and those allowances are provided for that purpose. And I'm not going to get into tonight a detail on what those allowances look like and what they're supposed to be used for, Mr. Speaker, but I appreciate the commentary that comes forward that says that we need greater accountability, greater transparency on these things. I have heard not just from members in my party, I have heard from members in all parties, and I heard the House Leader for the Liberal Party talk and express his frustration around, having been here for a long time in the House of Assembly and having seen many different kinds of mechanisms being put in, tried but not able to be used in order to address that very problem. And I guess the point that I'm trying to make, Mr. Speaker, is that all the members on the government side and on the opposition side recognize that when it comes to accountability, that the members of the House of Assembly need to be a model of accountability to their constituents. And that's whatever mechanism that the Premier can bring forward or that we can negotiate in order to try and make that happen. I think ultimately the jobs of the members of the House of Assembly will be made easier by that. We will have the opportunity to, not to have to worry about this every year becoming a bone of contention among not just members of the legislature, but members of the public. So I guess all of this is not just a general call for reform, but it is to say that that action, I believe, needs to be taken in order to ensure that the kind of transparency that we expect from other government departments, that we expect from other members of the public service, that we expect from everyone else who deals with public funds is also what we expect from ourselves. And I think there's just general agreement among people. It's the question of finding the mechanism that will adequately make that happen. And so I stand here this evening, and I realize that, in fact, most of what I've said is actually off the topic of this bill. Mr. Speaker, you've been very lenient in not calling me to task for that, but it's because I think that this bill actually is a transparent process, one that will be examined by the Law Amendments Committee, that will be, as I said, subject to commentary. And, even though we're cast in the position of having to talk about this subject, at least the process, and that's what I continue to hear from people, is that it is the process that they want to see opened up. And I think those are my comments on this bill for this evening, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Recognize all member for Cape Breton South.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, pleased to rise in a few comments on Bill 52, the House of Assembly Act. And as the leader of the NDP has said, some of his remarks were off the topic, but nevertheless relevant. And I would think that perhaps once the three leaders in the House meet on the current topic under discussion, namely members' salaries and allowances, that our caucus will have an opportunity then to react publicly to what is going to come as a recommendation from the three leaders. But tonight we're dealing with the bill itself. And Mr. Speaker, we've tried just about everything in the past years since I've been here to try to get this matter straightened out as regarding members' salaries, and including setting up a commission of inquiry, which, by the way, Mr. Speaker, at great expense to the taxpayers. And, taxpayers of this province, maybe some of them don't even realize that you don't get a commission of inquiry or a commissioner of inquiry for nothing. Although in the last case, Mr. Donoghue occupied that position and did it, I believe, just for expenses only the last time. But even that was considerable cost to the taxpayers. He needed support services and that. But I can recall paying commissioners, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year in the years that I've been here. And then the recommendations would be ignored by or some of the recommendations would be too much for us to bear, or some of the recommendations would be ones that were simply not palatable by either the conditions of the day, or by the mood of the public, or by the mood of the press, or whatever. But I say, so what method can we put in place here that's a fair method for salary increases at the present time? And the only fair method that I can see that can, I think, stand the test of time and be acceptable is to mirror the wage increases, the average of public servants in this province. And in this case, it's 2.9%, I believe, based on last year's. So, I mean, the members of the House of Assembly are therefore entitled to only what the public servants in this province are getting. And I believe that's a fair way of determining, at least for the present, the remuneration of members. And I certainly, in my party, my caucus here, certainly supports the bill that's before the House tonight. Is it perfect? No. But it's a way of saying to the members of the House of Assembly that this is something that's not exorbitant, that's not something that's going to be out of whack with current increases that are being paid in this province, that it mirrors the public servants, and certainly our party will support the bill. Thank you.
Recognize the Government House Leader to close debate on Bill 252. The Honourable.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the points brought forward by the opposition members with regard to this bill. It's a pain, Mr. Speaker, every year that rolls around as surely as Christmas, that we have to go through some kind of a process to set our own salaries. I agree it's not right. I agree that we should have some system in place that is fair and pays members what they should be paid, which is more than what they're presently getting. I agree that it should be transparent. I agree to those things. But the trouble is to get the thing in place first, and then it becomes automatic where there's an increase based on the cost of living or based on whatever the civil service is paid or anybody else, some other outside agency, Mr. Speaker. But we do have to get that first bill in and passed. And I would hope, Mr. Speaker, I won't be here, but when the new government comes into power after the next election, I would hope that we have in place for that government a process, Mr. Speaker, that will do away with this annual process, such as it is that we have. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Motion is for second reading of Bill 252. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 252, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1, 1992 Supplement of the Revised Statutes 1989, the House of Assembly Act.
Or this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call the order of business private members' public bills for second reading?
Private members' bills for second reading.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call bill number 237? And Bill 237 is the Maintenance Enforcement Act.
237. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to rise in support of this bill. No, Mr. Speaker, just a few short words on this bill. And in conversations sometimes after this bill was put forward, I had discussions with the Minister of Justice, and we've talked about this bill, and there is some belief that some of this may already exist, and which would be fine, and so on. But basically, what this bill does would if someone who gets a judgment against them, and they're having to pay through maintenance enforcement, and they're not paying their proper monies through maintenance enforcement, that it will give the right to have their name put into the credit bureau. So it would be another system of being probably access that bad debt, or at least a deterrent. More than likely, what I'd like to see is a deterrent, so that those people will not neglect their parental responsibility. And that's what we're looking for, Mr. Speaker. We're looking more for a deterrent than an enforcement. Yes, and so, Mr. Speaker, with that said, I'll be taking my place and looking forward for this bill to go through the House. Thank you.
Thank you. Recognize the Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise on Bill 237 and to make a few comments on this piece of legislation. I certainly want to commend the member from Cape Breton Centre for bringing this bill forward, and it certainly raises an important issue, Mr. Speaker, of maintenance enforcement and where we're at in this province. Mr. Speaker, I think most members, if not all members of this House, have probably had constituents come before them who have had concerns about maintenance enforcement here in this province. And I know that we've taken the opportunity to raise this issue with the Minister of Justice, with just how much support is being made available within the maintenance enforcement staff here in the province. Mr. Speaker, I can tell you throughout my own constituency office, I've had, for the most part, in my case, they have been mothers and females who have come forward and who have been very disappointed with the efforts made by maintenance enforcement, and the fact that many of them feel that they have to carry the burden themselves of having to figure out where their ex-spouse is working, how much money they're making, where they're living, who is their employer. They feel that in many ways that the burden falls back on them rather than it being the staff over at maintenance enforcement. Mr. Speaker, I know that the Minister of Justice has told us here in this House and has told us at committee that he's put more staff into maintenance enforcement and he's put more resources, but I would submit to you, Mr. Speaker, from the files I have at my office, that there's still much more work that needs to be done by maintenance enforcement to be vigilant. And I would submit to you that it is no way a critique of the staff at maintenance enforcement, because I believe there's not enough staff in that department right now, and that they have a tremendous amount of files. And Mr. Speaker, earlier this evening, I had the opportunity to speak about legal aid and legal aid lawyers and the amount of files that each one of the lawyers in legal aid has to carry, which is a tremendous amount, and it's extremely difficult for them to have to reject clients, whether it's on an issue of income, whether it's on an issue of what area of law they're asking for representation. And maintenance enforcement is no different. Staff is certainly limited in what they can communicate because of the vast amount of files that each one of them bears responsibility for. And Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you, it's disappointing when you hear some of the stories of how far individuals will go to avoid having to pay maintenance, whether it is to their spouse or whether it is to their children. It's incredibly, it's amazing to me, and having seen some of the stories at what lengths individuals will go through, it's disheartening, I would say, Mr. Speaker, and whether it's the stories of individuals, people who should be paying themselves, who are saying, well, I don't want to pay for my 3 children because it's my ex-spouse who's spending the money on her new boyfriend. And it's not going to the children. Well, that's extremely difficult to control, but at the end of the day, you have obligations. The court has rendered a decision on how much support you should pay, and you have to pay it. But, Mr. Speaker, we hear that on a daily basis, and so it puts that much more of a challenge on maintenance enforcement, because these individuals are looking for more and more creative ways to subvert the system. Mr. Speaker, I can tell you of one example where a gentleman left his full-time job, which was well-paying, so that he could go on EI just so he'd have to pay less support to his ex-spouse. Mr. Speaker, this is not always rational decisions that are being made by Nova Scotians that are impacted by this. Needless to say, there seems to be quite a bit of emotion that comes into these decisions, and logic almost seems to go out the door at times, which makes it more of a challenge for maintenance enforcement staff, because they have to try to enter the minds of these individuals and try to figure out exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it. And, Mr. Speaker, it's any sort of initiatives that can be brought forward that are going to make this easier for maintenance enforcement staff and easier for the families and the children that rely upon this system for their income, certainly is very favorable. Now, does Bill 237 add to that? Well, Mr. Speaker, only time will tell as to what impact it might have. I know the government had introduced some amendments that said that if you don't pay your maintenance, you could lose your driver's license. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, I know a few cases where that's been a good incentive to have individuals pay their maintenance enforcement, because here in Nova Scotia, especially in the rural parts, it's quite difficult to do anything without a driver's license. It's difficult to find employment. It's difficult to pretty much enjoy life in rural Nova Scotia without a driver's license, because as I've said many times, in Richmond County, if you're waiting for a taxi or waiting for Metro Transit to come pick you up, you might be waiting a while by the curb, because unfortunately we don't have those services in our area. So, Mr. Speaker, any sort of initiatives that are going to encourage people to respect the maintenance enforcement system are some that we fully support. But But I would like to have seen where the Minister of Justice might have been able to indicate to us.
Order, please. Order, please. The member for Richmond has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I was saying, I would have been pleased knowing that the government has called an opposition bill, which, Mr. Speaker, is a bit of a rarity at times when we see a bill being called by either my colleagues in the NDP or either our caucus. It's a bit of a rare event, which is all too unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, in a minority government when Nova Scotians are looking for all-party cooperation here in this House. But I would have certainly liked to have seen an indication from the Minister of Justice as to how he was going to incorporate the changes being proposed in this bill with possibly other initiatives which would have strengthened the maintenance enforcement system, because very much similar to the debate we had earlier, Mr. Speaker, on the tobacco bill, which would have allowed the government to take legal action against tobacco companies. The issue comes down to how much support is the government putting into these initiatives. Whether it be tobacco, whether it be maintenance enforcement, it's the same argument. From our concern, it's half measures, and it's not enough. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, when you hear some of the difficult stories that are coming from our own constituents, mothers who are now single, who have one child or two or three or four, and that are constantly spending their time battling to try to make sure that their ex-spouse is paying their maintenance payments. It's disheartening, Mr. Speaker, because it becomes all-consuming for the ex-spouse. And you can only imagine, Mr. Speaker, if you're living in a household where the mother of the children is constantly battling on the phone to try to make sure that payments and support payments are being made, that carries down to the children and the stress that it causes within families under these kind of circumstances. So this is not a new problem. And I would submit to you, Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, the trends of society would lead us to conclude that it's an issue which is going to grow. And therefore, the question is support from the government growing to keep up with that? I would submit to you it is not. Because if it was, both you and I and all other members from the legislature wouldn't be getting the amount of calls that we are getting. And it disheartens me each time I need to pick up the phone and call the Maintenance Enforcement Office in Sydney to ask them, have you been able to track down this individual? And I just spoke to his ex-wife. She says he's now working here. He's making this much money. Are you aware of that? It's an unfortunate battle, but one that we've probably each member of this House has had to face with. And I would submit to you that it's not something that's going to get any better unless we start taking the issue seriously and we make sure that individuals who have a duty to pay maintenance to their ex-spouse, and especially those who have a duty to pay maintenance to their children, are doing so. There certainly has been some progress that has been made from what was there initially, but it certainly has not been enough, which again, as I indicated, we would like to see from the Minister of Justice if he could give us an indication as to how he's going to incorporate this bill with other initiatives which would allow us to deal with this issue in a more effective way. Mr. Speaker, we know that there are initiatives already that have been put in place that individuals who do have maintenance orders against them can have their wages garnished, so that there's a direct payment being made to the Maintenance Enforcement Office and then forwarded off to the individuals who are participants or recipients of the program to make sure that they are actually, their income, percentage of their income is going towards their enforcement orders. But, Mr. Speaker, again, there's too many cases where individuals, it's difficult to track down where they're working. Even I've had a case where the new privacy laws are making it that much more difficult for government to be able to track down information on individuals as to where they may be employed, how much money they're making, and to try to put in some garnishee orders against them. So, you know, there are initiatives in place, but obviously there are still many loopholes that exist within the system, which we certainly need to address within government and to try to make this stronger. And I would certainly hope that with the government showing its support for this bill, that the Minister of Justice may have indicated to us whether he's prepared to put more staff in maintenance enforcement to try to decrease the workload that is on the staff that is there currently, to try to allow them to be more effective in their efforts. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, in following some of the cases, the caseworkers will tell you we're not in a position to be able to call all of the clients, the recipients of maintenance enforcement orders, to tell them all of the activities that are going on. We instead rely upon them to contact us for information and to provide us with any information they have, which I can tell you causes a great deal of frustration. And at the end of the day, in many ways, that frustration is being brought forward to us as elected officials. And as I mentioned earlier, I could stand in my place and recite so many of the stories that have come before me, and I know most members in this House would be quite familiar with those stories. And so while this is one more initiative being added, the question is, when are we going to sit down as elected officials and try to find a new means of being able to strengthen the Office of Maintenance Enforcement to try to deal with these matters? And I tell you, Mr. Speaker, this is a government-wide issue, because at the end of the day, many of the individuals who rely upon these enforcement orders, because they can't be dependent on it being a continuation, as a result, many of them turn to the Department of Community Services. So many of them have no choice, but because of the fact that they're trying to raise their children, they would hope that because of the court order, they could expect a certain level of income. Because of the interruptions that take place in that, they often have to turn to the Department of Community Services. So there's a government interest in this as well, because obviously it's costing the Department of Community Services a significant amount of money to support families that technically it would not need to support if maintenance enforcement was properly working. And I would like the Minister of Community Services to even give us an indication if his department has statistics that would keep track of just how many of their clients have maintenance enforcement orders in place. Because that, I believe, Mr. Speaker, would give us a clear picture of just how well maintenance enforcement is working. Are people properly paying the maintenance that they should be paying, or exactly what is the default rate here in this province? But hopefully, as the debate continues, possibly the Minister of Community Services will give us an indication whether his department has been keeping those stats. And as I know, one of my colleagues is not confident that those stats will be made available to us. But, Mr. Speaker, we're all interested in the expenses that are being incurred by the government. And at the end of the day, can we find savings within government? And by finding savings, we find an ability to invest money in some of the other priority areas of that the government is faced with. But as long as maintenance enforcement continues to not be able to properly make sure that those who have orders against them are paying, again, we have to bear the cost to the government with the Department of Community Services due to the unreliability of those payments and due to the stress that it places on families. So, Mr. Speaker, while this bill is a small step on one issue, it certainly broadens up the whole issue of marriage, the whole issue of support for families, the whole issue of obligations that one has not only to their spouse but to their children, and the impact that this is having on children throughout the entire province. Because, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you from the families that I've had come before my office, when these children have to constantly be faced with not having income in a certain month or waiting for a check to come in when it doesn't arrive in time, and whether it's on school supplies, whether it's to join certain sports, whether it's to enjoy what children should be enjoying, it has a tremendous impact. So this is an issue which affects families and which affects our society as a whole, and one which we should take extremely seriously. So I would certainly hope that the government would look at this from a broader perspective and possibly be able to indicate to this House as to what sort of review they are prepared to undertake on this issue, or if any changes can be expected to be forthcoming from the maintenance enforcement program to make it even stronger than what it is today. So again, as I was saying, Mr. Speaker, this is an important step. In this case, it's the idea is that if a person is in arrears, that the information will be passed on to the credit rating agency. What impact is that going to have? Mr. Speaker, we see more and more these payday loan companies that are setting up. We see the advertisements that are saying if your phone has been disconnected and if nobody else will give you phone service, call us and we'll give you phone service, no questions asked. We see car companies that are saying if no one else will give you credit, no one else will let you buy a car, call us and we'll give you one. One has to really ask what impact this bill is truly going to have. Because at the end of the day, regardless of how bad your credit might be, it's always possible to continue to be able to buy items and to receive services, regardless of what your credit rating might be. So, as legislators, again, it's important that we evaluate the legislation that comes before us. And while it may have the greatest of intention, it's always important for us to be realistic as to whether it has actually any hopes of success, or whether it's actually going to deter any actual Nova Scotians from reneging on their maintenance payments, because if they do, they may have what this bill aims to do, and that it would be reported to the credit rating agency. So, Speaker, I listened to the comments briefly from the member who supported this, who sponsored this bill, but I'd be curious exactly to see where this bill, what is based upon, and if this is legislation which has been adopted from another jurisdiction, and whether the member sponsoring this bill can provide us even with some statistics that may show in areas where such a penalty is imposed that there actually has been a change or a reduction in the amount of default for maintenance payments. And so, unless we're provided with that kind of information, I don't want to fault the member. I think he's trying to address an important issue, and I think he's bringing forward a positive suggestion, and I certainly commend him for that. But all great intentions aside, the question is, will this bill actually have any impact, or once again, is it merely window dressing and an attempt to say that some form of solution was proposed on a serious issue, which actually, at the end of the day, really has no hope of achieving any result. And Mr. Speaker, I think of, for example, here in Nova Scotia, clients or constituents, I should say, I've had who've been disconnected from Nova Scotia Power on too many occasions to repeat. You know what, Mr. Speaker? For the most part, they can get power again. And whether it's with Alliant that they've been cut off, eventually they'll get phone service again. Or there's these phone companies that have been set up especially to deal with people with bad credit. See, Nova Scotia Power is a bit different because there's not really any company that's offering you electricity if Nova Scotia Power won't give you electricity. So,
order, please. Now, member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I was saying, it's a bit different with electricity because there's not many companies out there that are offering you electricity if Nova Scotia Power won't. In fact, if you can't get electricity from Nova Scotia Power, other than a generator or a wind turbine or a water type turbine, I'm not really sure how else you would get electricity. So that's a bit of a different situation. So again, I raise that not to be critical of the member's legislation. I certainly commend him for raising an important issue and allowing us to debate that issue here in the House, but will it actually have any sort of impact in discouraging Nova Scotians who have maintenance obligations from being able to from meeting those obligations? Speaker, there's two sides to the story, and often we talk about the how negative it is when people don't pay their maintenance, and at the same time I've heard stories from people who are required to pay maintenance, which are unfortunate stories as well, and can understand some of the challenges that they and the frustrations that they face sometimes. I had a gentleman who was quite upset that while he had a court order requiring him to pay maintenance, the court order also granted him access, and at the end of the day, he wasn't getting any access. And so his argument was, why should I pay maintenance when I'm supposed to get access and I'm not getting access? And so he called me and said, look, I want you to help me, and I don't want to pay my maintenance anymore. Well, Mr. Speaker, very simply, my answer was, well, you have no choice. There's a court order in place, and your only other option is to go back to court to be able to have the maintenance order amended. And again, the issue is money. This gentleman said, look, I work for a very low salary. I work two jobs, and last time I went to court up to this point, it's cost me about $6,000, and I still don't have access. So there are challenges throughout our entire system, Mr. Speaker, on both sides. those who are waiting and hope to, that the government will have a system in place that will enforce maintenance orders, and those on the flip side who are supposed to pay maintenance that are frustrated at our court system, at the delays involved in the family court system, at some of the orders given towards access and towards custody, which are not being respected. So, we certainly have a myriad of issues which are raised with this bill that I believe deserve a full discussion and certainly an indication from the government as to whether they take these issues seriously and what sort of initiatives that they are looking at possibly imposing, so that we can have a better sense of where the government is going on such an important issue. And as I said, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say that the way society is going is that maintenance enforcement is going to be a thing of the past. That's not the case. We all know that the issues dealing with families, with children in our society, that more and more the importance of the maintenance enforcement is going to continue to play a pivotal role in our province and in our society, and we need to make sure that the government is prepared to properly respond to those situations. And I have to tell you, to date, my experience as an MLA and with the files that are coming before me is we do not have enough support in the Maintenance Enforcement Division. And again, that's not a critique of the individuals who work there, it's a critique of the government who has not given it enough support, because I know the workers there are great to work with. As I said, the Sydney office that I've had an opportunity to deal with have been very prompt, they've been very considerate, and have certainly, I believe, are doing their best given the limited resources that they do have. But at the end of the day, workers can only handle so many files, and unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, those who are under maintenance enforcement orders are finding more and more creative ways to be able to avoid maintenance. Mr. Speaker, if I'm not mistaken, I believe we did pass legislation here in this House that tried to give the government more powers to have maintenance enforcement orders enforced outside of our jurisdiction. I believe there was an understanding through the Uniform Law Conference that all the provinces would adopt a system that each province would respect the other province as to whether someone under a maintenance enforcement order was going to Ontario to work or going to Alberta to work, or whether someone from there was coming here to work. The government would try to make sure as much as possible that enforcement orders were being respected in those areas. It's interesting if the Minister of Justice would give us an indication of whether that system has been working and whether it has made some changes in how many individuals are respecting their enforcement orders, and as to sort of what cooperation that we are receiving from other provinces. And the reason I raise that, Mr. Speaker, is I think we'd be naive if we didn't recognize that for the most part, as much as the government may say our employment numbers are high or our unemployment numbers are low, I think we've just seen that the September stats are starting to show a reverse trend. And so the reality is, for the most part, Nova Scotians often are leaving our province to go work in other provinces, which raises an extra challenge for a maintenance enforcement to keep track of individuals. Because it's a little easier to keep track of someone from Yarmouth to Cape Breton than it is to keep track of someone who's out in Alberta or is out in Ontario or British Columbia or Saskatchewan. It makes it extremely difficult. Not only that, I know of individuals who go and work out in Alberta in the north, and sometimes they change companies quite regularly. Depending on the job they're on, they can keep moving from company to company. It makes it extremely difficult for maintenance enforcement that are sitting here in Nova Scotia trying to figure out who the individual is working for and how much money they're making and how long they've been working. And one of the tools that maintenance enforcement has tried to use, Mr. Speaker, for example, is people's income tax return. But now, income tax returns are useful when people file their income tax. And I can tell you, I know of one case that I've been dealing with, that the gentleman who is supposed to be paying maintenance hasn't filed in 5 years. So his income tax return isn't useful for maintenance enforcement because he doesn't file. He somehow managed to stay under the radar and not file. So how do you find out where this individual worked, how much money they made, how many weeks did they work, and how much maintenance should they have paid when they don't file their income tax? So, Mr. Speaker, as I was saying earlier, there are all sorts of tricks, basically, might as well use that word, that have been adopted by individuals to get around the system. The question becomes, what is maintenance enforcement and the Department of Justice doing to close those loopholes and to make it that much more difficult? I would submit to you, while the honourable member has great intentions with this legislation, I don't believe that is going to close those loopholes. So what are we doing as a government and as a province to try to tell families that rely upon maintenance enforcement orders that we are doing everything we possibly can to make sure those orders are enforced? Now, we can never be perfect. There's no doubt of that. Because human nature is that no matter, regardless of what rules you put in place, someone will find a way to get around them. But how strong can we make those rules to give maintenance enforcement staff the resources they need and the powers, more importantly, the powers that they need to enforce these maintenance orders? Because until we do that, Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to see families that are not receiving the support that they need. We're going to continue seeing families turn to the Department of Community Services for support. Not that they want to. Mr. Speaker, in many ways, these people are saying, we're embarrassed to go to community services because we shouldn't have to, because there's a court order saying that we should be receiving this much money for the support of myself and my children. Why should I have to go to community services? But they have no choice, Mr. Speaker. I had a lady that I worked with, and it was the same thing. She could never predict when she would get her maintenance payments. She'd get them 1 month, wait 3 months, get them for 2 months, wait 6 months. And it was her only source of income. She had a young child. And I told the lady, you should go to the Department of Community Services because they at least could give you some continuity. And if you receive your payments, then they'll deduct that from what you're receiving. So technically, you're not taking any money from the department. You're only getting continuity to make sure that you're actually receiving your payments, and they will take the money accordingly that should have been received by you. And her answer was, I don't want to be on welfare. And as much as I tried to explain to her, technically you're not. This is just a way of assuring that you're going to receive your payments. And in fact, the money that you should have been paid maintenance will go to the government, so they're actually reimbursed for the money. At the end of the day, she did not want the stigma of being a client of community services. Nor should she have to be if the maintenance enforcement program was properly functioning. Mr. Speaker, I submit to you it is not. And there's more work that needs to be done. Yes, the Minister of Justice has made changes. I do not deny that. I believe those changes have helped to a certain extent. But is there more that can be done? Obviously there has to be. Because if not, our maintenance enforcement program is not working. And until we start addressing this issue as a whole, as to how it's working, such bills are important steps, but they are not the solution. And I have fear that these types of bills can be used by the government to say, we did something about maintenance enforcement, we passed NDP legislation. Will that help the families in Richmond County that rely on maintenance? I don't think it will. I really don't think it will. Because credit rating used to be an extremely important aspect of society. People would fear that there'd be any sort of bad rating under credit. Today, it's a natural occurrence. Mr. Speaker, students who don't pay their student loan payment in time, before they find out, they get a notice saying that they've been given a bad credit rating because they missed a student loan payment. These are 20-year-olds, 21, 22, 19, that are getting bad credit from the student aid system. And we're saying that passing a bill for people who should be paying maintenance for is going to give them bad credit and that they're going to take this seriously? Our best and brightest students, for the most part, a great deal of them, are entering their professions with a bad credit rating because they may have missed a student loan payment. And why do they miss student loan payments? Because sometimes when they're under the belief that they have their loan remission approved, there's some months where they're actually required to pay that they weren't made aware of. By missing those payments, even though they make all of their payments for the rest of their loan, they're left with a bad credit rating to carry around. So again, Mr. Speaker, to say that the maintenance enforcement is going to get stronger by saying we'll give bad credit to those who haven't paid in 6 months, we're doing that to our students.
Yeah, pretty long.
The people who've gone to university that are going to be the future leaders of our province, we do that to them on a regular basis.
Still a bow though, Mike.
Yet they have no choice. They have to continue with that. And as I mentioned before, there are so many lending agencies now. Mr. Speaker, we see them on a regular basis where they say you haven't gotten your paycheck in time, need money. Well, come to this company and we'll give you money and wait for your paycheck. Pay no attention that we're going to charge you 150% a day for what we're giving you. That's in the fine print. But, Mr. Speaker, that is the reality. People with bad credit continue to survive in this province, and for the most part, they can survive as if nothing has ever happened. So, this bill, again, as I said, Mr. Speaker, I believe it is a good faith attempt by the member from Cape Breton Centre to address an important issue, but more needs to be done. Because as long as you and I and all our members continue to hear the horror stories from constituents, from mothers with children who are not receiving the payments they need, that children are being denied the quality of life that they should be receiving because the maintenance enforcement has failed, we need to do more. And again, as our system works, Mr. Speaker, I can stand in my place and talk all evening. It takes a Minister of Justice and it takes the government to actually make concrete changes. Unfortunately, our system does not allow us to do that. We can't even call a bill. It takes a government House leader to do that. So it takes the government to make this initiative, Mr. Speaker, and that's why I wanted to take this opportunity to remind the government that it's not just a matter of showing support for an opposition bill. This is a call for a change to our maintenance enforcement system. And until we start doing that, we continue to have the problems which I have highlighted up to now. And I would hope that the Minister of Justice would join in this debate and even give us a bit of a review of where is maintenance enforcement today compared to where it was in 1999 or where it was in 1990, for example, or where it was in 1985. Where are we? Where have we gone? The Minister of Education says it's much better. I don't doubt. You know, with time, everything should get better. But the question is it as good as it should be? That is the question that needs to be raised on this, a question that I'm sure that my colleague from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage will want to learn about, and I'm sure that he just doesn't want to see this bill passed, but wants to see what changes will be made in maintenance enforcement to make it stronger, because I'm sure even he has had constituents that have come to him with some of the challenges that are being faced by families here in Nova Scotia. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased that the government has called this bill. The question again becomes, when will the government actually put this bill in effect? How quickly will the minister give maintenance enforcement staff the ability to implement this change? And second of all, as I mentioned with the earlier bills, will the minister even be keeping track to see whether these changes are going to have a positive influence on those who should be paying maintenance enforcement, or is it something at the end of the day which truly has not had any real impact on such an important issue? So, as I said, Mr. Speaker, I believe the initiative is now in the hands of the Minister of Justice, and I do truly hope that he will take the opportunity on second reading to give us a bit of a sense of as to what he's going to be doing on maintenance enforcement. And just again, Mr. Speaker, I want to reiterate, we have come a long ways in maintenance enforcement. There is no doubt. And I know this minister has taken initiatives which has improved the abilities of maintenance enforcement staff to enforce orders. The question becomes, is it enough? Can we do more? Is this a step in doing more? Or what other initiatives has the staff indicated that they would like, what other powers would they like to have that may make it better? Just one closing example. The minister has given his staff the opportunity to order that someone lose their driver's license if they don't pay. How many Nova Scotians have lost their driver's license under that system? Has that worked? That'd be interesting to find out. How many people have had their licenses revoked for not paying their maintenance enforcement, their maintenance orders, I should say? That would be interesting, because if the numbers are high, I would submit that it's probably having its designated effect. But then again, what impact is it having? So those are initiatives the government has brought in, the minister has brought in, and I would hope that when he stands in his place, he can give us an indication of what success those initiatives have had, and whether he believes that this initiative will have success as well. So I don't know if he has the stats of how many people have lost their driver's license because of the maintenance enforcement program. I'm sure his competent staff might be able to provide us with such information, but I believe it's an important element of this debate, Mr. Speaker, is to look at the entire maintenance enforcement program. Is it working? Can we improve it? And is this an opportunity, by opening this debate that the member from Cape Breton Centre has allowed us the opportunity to do, to seek further changes to the Act through his bill? Because as we know, when we go to law amendments, the opposition has a majority at law amendments, so maybe there's actually more initiatives which can be added to the member from Cape Breton Centre's bill. I'm sure he wouldn't be opposed to that. If we can make his bill even stronger and more of a legacy for him. Not that I'm suggesting he's going anywhere anytime soon, but one never knows in this business, Mr. Speaker, how long one will be here. But I believe it is an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, and I would hope that when this bill does make it to law amendments and that we have an opportunity to look at it, and that the Minister of Justice hopefully will provide us some stats from maintenance enforcement, that at the end of the day we can look to see if we can make this bill even stronger than what it is. Maybe it is already sufficiently strong, but just in case, let us keep an open mind and let us do our best as parliamentarians to support the families out there that rely upon maintenance enforcement orders, and to support the children who too often also rely upon these orders. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize all Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it is my pleasure, in fact, to rise and speak to this bill that was introduced by the honourable member from Cape Breton Centre. And Mr. Speaker, first of all, I want to commend the honourable member. I know his sentiment in bringing this forward was in fact to highlight another tool that could be used by our maintenance enforcement system in this province to help protect families who are not receiving payments from spouses or former spouses. I was pleased to find out, actually, after the honourable member had made an inquiry about, or it indicated to me he was introducing this bill, to check with our maintenance enforcement program to learn that they believe that they have the authority under that existing legislation to do this. But I still believe the legislation is important, and I will be supporting the bill because it will further outline one of the legislative tools given by this legislature to the maintenance enforcement program to assist in the collection of the monies owed. We will have, I think, some minor changes to suggest that law amendments to the bill that will improve it, but the principle of the bill, which is that people's credit rating it can be a technique used to lead people to do what they should be doing voluntarily, which is to pay the maintenance enforcement, the maintenance orders without enforcement. So, Mr. Speaker, I support that. I would, however, want to make a couple of comments. One in particular is about the fact that I do believe that the maintenance enforcement system today is better than it was. I believe that a number of the changes that have been introduced over the last number of years, increased staff, improved legislative tools, have assisted the maintenance enforcement program in enforcing court orders. Do I believe that the problems are fixed? Absolutely not. Until every order is respected and paid, the system will constantly need to be reviewed and assisted so that people, and particularly children, receive the money that they are entitled to receive and which have been ordered by the courts. So, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that our department is vigilant, and I have given instructions to the department to look across this country and indeed into the United States to look at enforcement tools that are being used elsewhere to see what the most modern tools that can be used to ensure the payment of under these orders. And our department will be continuing to monitor the situation to continue to look for how we can better serve those clients whose orders we're enforcing. I can also indicate, Mr. Speaker, that I continue to hope that resources will continue to grow, human resources, to assist in the enforcement of those maintenance orders. And so, I can indicate, Mr. Speaker, that we are doing more and we will continue to do more. But I cannot go without passing on one comment, and that was the honourable member from Richmond who talked about legal aid. And I think it's important that the House know the national disgrace, which is federal liberal legal aid funding. Yes, Mr. Speaker, I just think that it's important for everyone in the House to appreciate that while year after year, this House has continued to vote increased money to legal aid funding, that in fact the core funding for legal aid in this province given to us by the federal Liberal government has decreased. Now, you know, and it waxes a little strange that the federal Minister of Justice at Canadian Bar Association meetings, which I've been going to for a number of years, continues to talk about the importance of legal aid funding. Well, I agree with him. But you know what? Never, ever, ever does he match the rhetoric with the money. Mr. Speaker, we need the money. I agree with the honourable member that increased funding, particularly for family legal aid, the so-called civil legal aid, would be a great assistance to our families. The problem is, Mr. Speaker, that while we have been growing our funding at quite considerable rates, the federal government has effectively had a freeze. And in fact, the federal minister has opined about, well, he's not really sure that money, that is an issue that he really should be involved in, and he's very interested in talking about constitutional jurisdiction. Well, Mr. Speaker, you know, you can't have it both ways. You can't mouth the words and say what a wonderful idea it is that we increase legal aid funding, at the same time not increasing the funding. So I would encourage the honourable members opposite to speak to their brethren in Ottawa to match the rhetoric with the money. And that will truly benefit families in Nova Scotia as they try to enforce those orders. And with those few brief remarks, Mr. Speaker, I would like to support the honourable member's bill.
Order, please. The honourable member for Glace Bay. Order, please. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's as usual, always an honor to stand in this House and speak on any bill. But it's always a pleasure to stand up when you hear the Minister of Justice stand before this House and utter the words matching rhetoric with money. Mr. Speaker, what an unbelievable statement coming from the Minister of Justice for that government to say that you have to match rhetoric with money. Unbelievable, Mr. Speaker, absolutely unbelievable that minister would utter those words from that government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me tell you, the fact that this government even called this bill is nothing more than a deal that's been worked up between the government and the New Democratic Party. That's all it is, Mr. Speaker. That's all it is. This bill...
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Yeah, order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Government House Leader. I actually agree with the Honourable Government House Leader. The Honourable Member suggesting that members are involved in something with impure motive in this House, and I ask the Honourable Member to retract that, please. The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I made any reference to that, certainly I would retract it.
Thank you.
Order, please.
Order, please. Thank you for retracting that. Now, the Honourable Member for Glace Bay, we're on second reading of number 237. I asked the Honourable Member to bring back his comments to the principle of Bill 237. Order, please. I could have also brought the Honourable Member Richmond the same issue. So, the Honourable Member for Glace Bay on the principle of 237, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for that clarification. I appreciate that. Appreciate that clarification. In the words of the NDP House Leader, I'm not going to find much substance in this bill to talk about. His words, Mr. Speaker, but I will try, and it won't be much help looking at this paper because there's nothing there, Mr. Speaker. That's the fact of the matter. Absolutely nothing there. You know, the members of this House know full well, and the Justice Minister knows full well, if you've dealt with any kind of issues whatsoever dealing with maintenance enforcement, you know that this is not going to be of any help whatsoever to the women and children that deal with maintenance enforcement issues, Mr. Speaker. No help whatsoever. That's the fact of this matter. It is, you know, it is, and the member for Timberley Prospect can bellow from the back of the bleachers as he usually does, as much as he wants, Mr. Speaker. But let him get up first. If he wants to get up and talk about it, Mr. Speaker. But he knows full well that this bill, if you're talking about when the payer is 6 months in arrears and going before a credit rating agency, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. All member Cole-Harbour-Chin passage.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, the member knows full well at second reading he's not supposed to be reading directly from the bill. It's about principle, not clause by clause.
I don't know if he knows that or not, Kevin.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. I think every member in this House can be guilty of breaking several rules, whether it's reading from or otherwise. The all member for Glace Bay on the second reading of Bill number 237, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the House Leader for the NDP for that lesson in what to do and what not to do in the legislature, Mr. Speaker. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, that we are talking about. Sure, Mr. Speaker. If the government House Leader for the NDP wants to stand up and talk about this bill, then go ahead. If not, I suggest he should perhaps hold his place and be quiet and let me have my say, Mr. Speaker. Otherwise, you know, he should go in the back rooms and talk with the other members of the NDP caucus about something they've introduced that means that.
Order, please. Order, please. Now, member Glace Bay on Bill number 237.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me give you some examples of what we're talking about here, Mr. Speaker, and I've had many examples come through my office in Glace Bay. And again, you know, we're dealing 99.9% here with women and with children. And people who have come into the office and said, look, I can't do anything about the Maintenance Enforcement Act, and I've tried dealing with the office, whatever the case may be. Again, as the honourable member for Richmond pointed out, it's not the fault of the staff that's at the Maintenance Enforcement Office in Sydney or anywhere else in this province, Mr. Speaker. The fact of the matter is that these are difficult issues to deal with. And here's the other statement that hit kind of home when I heard the Minister of Justice reply to this bill, Mr. Speaker. We are doing more and continue to do more. Oh, heaven forbid that this government would continue to do more about maintenance enforcement. The fact of the matter is that this government, as it said, is now introducing an NDP bill, Mr. Speaker, an NDP bill, Bill number 237, that is, why are they doing it, Mr. Speaker, is what most women and children in this province would be asking. Why are you introducing an NDP bill that deals only with a credit rating agency when there's so much more that you could be doing to deal with the issues that surround this whole area of maintenance enforcement? Much more, Mr. Speaker. There are currently, I don't know the exact stats, I just know from individual. And these are, Mr. Speaker, you know, these are individuals that come into the office and say, hey, I'm owed $2,000, I'm owed $3,000, I'm owed $4,000 in maintenance enforcement. What can you do to possibly help me collect that money from my ex-husband or whatever the case may be? Is this, Mr. Speaker, is this going to help? Is this going to help that woman or child collect? And how so? Obviously, as the member for Richmond has correctly pointed out, being reported to a credit agencies these days is not that big of a deal. Surely the government knows that. Surely the government knows that. And as a matter of fact, it might be a hindrance to actually collecting that money from that individual who is in arrears. if you report that person to the credit rating agency? Has the member for Cape Breton Centre, who introduced this legislation, has he thought about that? Has the government thought about that? If you ruin a person's credit rating, how then does that person go about possibly getting money to pay the arrears to maintenance enforcement? Well, I mean, it's possible. It's actually possible. You're talking about a person, it's going to take 6 months, according to the NDP's legislation. It's going to take 6 months to report them to a credit rating agency. Mr. Speaker, it's just another example. This is another example that the government is simply wasting time here. That's all they're doing, wasting time. They have nothing of any substance whatsoever to bring before this House right now, except to cherry-pick a member, in this case an NDP member's legislation, and put it before the House and say, well, let's debate this, let's talk about this. And let's hope, so that we can appease the NDP, let's hope that this gets through right away, because maybe down the road, in 2 or 3 days, whatever the case may be, we might be able to use them. We might be able to get their help, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. The member is out of order, and I ask him to retract it again. The next time, I'm going to ask him to take his place. Now, Member Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me bring myself back to Bill number 237.
Withdraw the comment. Order, please. Now, Member Glace Bay will withdraw the
I
comment.
was just about to do that. Yep. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, and I do retract that statement.
Thank you. Now, Member Glace Bay.
Speaker, the bill itself, you know, is looking at the issue of a credit rating agency. The member for Richmond brought up several points during his debate. One good point that he brought up is that what happens if the person has not reported their income tax, because that's exactly what maintenance enforcement is based on. It's based on your income tax return. If that person hasn't filed an income tax return for 1 year, 2 years, several years, whatever the case may be, Mr. Speaker, then again you're left with a situation of exactly what does this piece of legislation do? Where does it go, Mr. Speaker? What does it do? You know, Mr. Speaker, as I said, if we want to do more for the people who are directly affected by this, if we want to help the people who are affected by maintenance enforcement or the lack of maintenance enforcement, and how we can make it possible for them to collect on arrears, or the case may be, then obviously the first thing we have to do is strengthen the resources that are available to these women and children. Mr. Speaker, it takes sometimes months, absolutely months, for any phone call to be returned sometimes regarding maintenance enforcement, because the staff isn't there. The caseload is there. As we've seen many, many times throughout this province, the caseload is always there, whether it be in social services. The Minister for Justice himself indicated that the caseload is there, as the member for Richmond did with legal aid. The caseload is there. And maintenance enforcement workers find themselves with that same caseload, Mr. Speaker. It takes, in order for you to change, to the best of my knowledge, in order for you to change a maintenance enforcement order, you must go or make application before the courts. That's where maintenance enforcement orders originate. So you don't have to actually go before a court, but you can fill out an application form that you can obtain at the courthouse or at wherever the office may be located, and you fill that out. At which time, if I'm again not mistaken, there may be an arbitrator, or I forget the exact term, that deals with the matter. Again, time passes, Mr. Speaker. You're left again with a situation where the arrears continue. There may not be regular maintenance that's coming in. There may not be a regular payment that's coming in. And in that case, again, the person may be affected by the fact that they're not receiving that regular check. The maintenance arrears are continuing to build, and then they file the claim, they file the application, it has to be dealt with. Again, you're left with time. But if you have someone who's supposed to have been paying, their arrears for 6 months, and then all of a sudden you report them to a credit agency, okay? Then explain to me, Mr. Speaker, what does that do? What does it do? What benefit do you gain from reporting them to a credit agency, Mr. Speaker? You know, if indeed, and the minister himself has stood on his feet here tonight and said, Mr. Speaker, and if we go back and Hansard, the minister said, I'm not sure what use this legislation will be, because we may already have the authority to do this. We may already have the authority to do this. The staff at Maintenance Enforcement says we may already have the authority to do this. Why wait 6 months? So why wait 6 months, Mr. Speaker? if the maintenance enforcement staff, if the Minister of Justice through his department already has the authority to do this, why are we going to wait 6 months to put this legislation through? No, not to put the legislation through. It's going to not take that long, 6 months, if it does go through, Mr. Speaker. But why would you have to wait 6 months in arrears if the maintenance enforcement staff, if the Minister of Justice already has the authority to do that? Why wouldn't it be done? Why are we dealing with matters of arrears already, Mr. Speaker? Why is it that we have to stand in this legislature and talk about this type of legislation and talk about this bill if that power, if that authority already exists at maintenance enforcement departments across this province? It's a question, Mr. Speaker, that nobody has answered. It's a question that the Minister of Justice hasn't addressed. It is a matter that he directly brought up. He is the one who said that we may not actually need this kind of legislation because the people at the department already think that they have the authority to do with that. Instead, Mr. Speaker, the minister took the opportunity to try and do as this government always does and blame everything on Ottawa. And, you know, blame this on Ottawa too, and blame everything from legal aid funding to whatever the case may be. Let's blame it on Ottawa, Mr. Speaker. If you want to match rhetoric with money, Mr. Speaker, then the Justice Minister in this case, in this bill, shouldn't have to bring forward this bill because the Justice Minister and the Justice Department already have the authority. The authority has already been given to them to deal with these matters. You know, more staff, Mr. Speaker. That's one of the key points here. If you want to deal with arrears, and there are more and more arrears that are building up in maintenance enforcement, and you want to deal with them, then you give the Maintenance Enforcement Office the staff that they need. You give them the person power that they require to properly treat this, and then you will have rhetoric, okay, that's no longer there. Then you will have the money that's necessary to take on this problem. And it is a problem, Mr. Speaker. This is a huge problem in this province. There are people, and I've had them come into my office, and they've told me that they're chasing their ex-husbands, and you know that I got to say that's 100% of the case. In my case, they're after their ex-husbands. These are women and children we're talking about, and the arrears are substantial ones. These are arrears that always, you know, they build up, and this is money that, hey, the Social Services Department has no problem taking this maintenance enforcement and saying that's income. They have absolutely no problem declaring that income. But when it's not there, well, you know, that's a problem we can't deal with. That's a problem that maintenance enforcement has to deal with, or whatever the case may be. So here we are, Mr. Speaker, and we stand and we talk about you know, a bill that's been introduced. It's a private member's bill. It's a bill that's called by government, and government you know, tries to convince us that this is a bill that needs support, that this is a bill that will do good, that this is a bill that you know, is the be-all to the end-all of maintenance enforcement issues. It's going to help solve a lot of problems. Well, Mr. Speaker, that's not necessarily the case. You know, you've already heard from the member of Richmond, who outlined for a considerable amount of time the problems that there are with this bill. And there's a considerable amount of problems. You know, staffing is that's just the surface. You know, if you look at the whole maintenance enforcement issue, what we have to do is get serious about this problem in Nova Scotia. The member for Richmond again raised the question of that, okay, you have the right to take away your license, right? How many licenses have been taken away? Have you used that tool? Has it worked? You know, have you taken that tool that has been given to you to try and bring justice to this question? Have you taken that and have you used it to your ability? We don't know, because nobody's answering our questions. Nobody's telling us whether or not that has been used. Is this going to be a useful tool in that same field? We don't know. The minister just decides to tell us, get up on his feet and say that, you know, let's match rhetoric with money, and you know, we're doing more, and we continue to do more. Oh, Mr. Speaker, you know, we can't live on platitudes like that in the legislature. We need substance. That's what we need to legislation in this legislature, Mr. Speaker. This is not a bill that gives us substance here. This is rhetoric. You want an example of rhetoric? This is rhetoric. That's all it is. You know, Mr. Speaker, this is going to have, as my colleague again from Richmond indicated, this is going to have, Mr. Speaker, the government House Leader from the NDP can heckle me all he wants, but I have every right as a member of this legislature to stand on my feet and debate any legislation that I feel free to do so. And that's why the people of Glace Bay sent me here, Mr. Speaker, and I will continue to do that no matter how much the NDP complains about that, Mr. Speaker. I don't care. The NDP can protest until the lights go out. I don't care. I will stand here and I will debate legislation when I don't think it's good legislation or when I think it's good legislation, Mr. Speaker. And in this case, Mr. Speaker, you know, what we have here, as I've said, is we have a bill that's been introduced. It's a private member's bill. The government has decided that they're going to put forward this piece of legislation. And they're trying to tell us that they've done something. They're trying to sell us something, you know. It's like, I was going to say something, Mr. Speaker, but I know that you probably, I've had 2 warnings so far, so Mr. Speaker, I'm going to pull back a bit, and I'm not going to go there, okay? I'm not. Mr. Speaker, I'm thinking about it now, Mr. Speaker, but I didn't say it. That's why. But anyway, you know, this has an impact, Mr. Speaker. It has an impact on the Department of Community Services and on community service in general, Mr. Speaker, because, you know, if there's 2 or 3 issues that have been to the forefront since I become an MLA, social services that I deal with on a regular basis, social services, maintenance enforcement would be within the top 5 easily, Mr. Speaker, and of course there would be things like workers' compensation issues and Canada pension issues and so on and so forth. But on a consistent basis, if you talk about the number 1 issue, I think would probably be, in my own constituency anyway, social services. And maintenance enforcement issues have a direct connection, a direct correlation with social services issues, Mr. Speaker, because usually the complaint that you hear, usually the first complaint that you hear is that, look, I'm getting this much for maintenance enforcement, and social services says that is dollar for dollar off my income assistance benefits that I think I'm entitled to. And why is that? Because, well, usually community services, or someone says you make too much money, which, Mr. Speaker, is a statement that I've said in this House before, should never be made by any civil servant, because there is no one that I know of who's on community services that makes too much money. Mr. Speaker, you don't get rich in Nova Scotia by being on community services, and anybody who says that you do is not living in the real world. Mr. Speaker, what happens is that because it's dollar for dollar, because of that connection, because of that correlation, what happens is that the dollars are clawed back. That's what happens. It's as simple as that. So if your ex-husband is giving you $300 a month, that's $300 a month that you're not going to get from community services, okay? Mr. Speaker, that's $300 a month, I may add, that added to community services would certainly be a benefit to the people who would be collecting it. It certainly wouldn't make them rich. It certainly wouldn't give them anything that would put them in an income bracket, let's say, that would be comfortable. All it would do is perhaps give them some more necessities in life, and that would be the benefit of it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if again, as I said, if the government is serious, if the government is serious about maintenance enforcement issues, they could do a lot more than simply introducing this bill, Mr. Speaker. A lot more. They could take the opportunity right now to do a thorough review of maintenance enforcement issues in this province, Mr. Speaker. A thorough review, which I think the time has probably come that we step back and take a look at what should be done in terms of providing proper maintenance enforcement in this province. You know, what we've done throughout the years has been pretty willy-nilly, Johnny-come-lately, whatever the phrase you may be that wants to apply to it. And we've taken and we've grabbed, like a grab bag from other provinces and so on, and said, well, that seems to work, let's apply it here, and that worked out there, let's apply it here. But instead, what we should be doing, and what the government should be doing, is saying, well, let's take a look at the entire issue of maintenance enforcement. Not just wait until there's a private member's bill that deals with a credit rating agency or whatever. Let's take a look at the entire area of maintenance enforcement, what's needed to make it better. Not what's needed to be complacent, not what's needed to try and satisfy the New Democratic Party, not what's needed to try and sell Nova Scotians that you're actually doing a job. What's needed here, Mr. Speaker, what's needed here is probably a thorough and even independent review of what's going on with maintenance enforcement. Talk to the stakeholders, Mr. Speaker. Talk to the stakeholders. Talk to the people who are working in maintenance enforcement. Talk to the people who are dealing with income assistance. Talk to the people who rely on maintenance enforcement to actually live, Mr. Speaker. Talk to them. Talk to the justice system. Talk to the courts. Talk to the administrators. Talk to the social workers who are dealing with these issues on a daily basis, and ask them, are we doing enough in this province? Are we doing enough in terms of maintenance enforcement and what it provides to those who have gone through what sometimes can be, Mr. Speaker, sometimes it can be a tremendously stressful situation to go through the courts and actually end up in a maintenance enforcement agreement. There are all sorts of I don't know how to describe it. When you go through a divorce, let's say, Mr. Speaker, and you go through the turmoil and stress that's involved with a divorce, and you end up before court, and you end up before officers, and you end up relying on a maintenance enforcement agreement, and there are lawyers involved, and there are, and at the end of it, Mr. Speaker, what's left at the end of the day is that you have this amount that's supposed to be provided to that person on that day at that particular time. Now, Mr. Speaker, that's fine. The courts can say that. There are instances where people have had to apply and say, I can't do it. I've had a change in income, whatever the case may be. I can't. And you can do that, Mr. Speaker. It's not, I was going to say as easy. It's not easy, but it's simply getting an application from the Department of Justice and applying to have your maintenance enforcement order changed in whatever way, shape, or form. But, Mr. Speaker, my point is that when you go through that entire process, at the end of the day, you're left with a piece of paper, Mr. Speaker, that you're left with a piece of paper that you expect will be enforced, because it is a legal document. Let's remember that. A maintenance enforcement order is a legal document. But to suggest, Mr. Speaker, that just because your arrears would build up for 6 months or 8 months or whatever the case may be, and because of that...
Order, please. The member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to suggest that because of that amount of time, whatever arbitrary amount of time you should decide, just to suggest that amount of time, after that amount of time passes, that you would be reported to a credit rating agency. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me tell you a little bit anyway about credit rating agencies. Credit rating agencies are regulated as well. But the fact of the matter is, anybody who knows anything about credit rating in this province would know it's not that hard, after your credit rating has been ruined, to obtain another credit rating, to obtain a credit card, to obtain a line of credit, or whatever the case may be. So, Mr. Speaker, again, another point to be made is that if the Director of Maintenance Enforcement were to report your arrears to a credit rating agency, what exactly does that mean? What exactly would it do? Would it mean that your entire credit rating, your entire ability to borrow money, whatever the case may be, is ruined for a long time? You don't know, Mr. Speaker. We have no way of knowing that. My suggestion to you would be that no, it would not. No, it would not. It would mean, as a matter of fact, that simply it is a reporting to a credit agency.
Order, please. Now, member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too find the noise somewhat objectionable, but I appreciate your interventions, Mr. Speaker. The fact of the matter is that the report that would be given by the director to the credit rating agency may amount to absolutely nothing, Mr. Speaker. That's the fact of this matter. It may or may not result and have the credit rating agency, put a bad credit rating against you. It may. That's not necessarily the case. It depends on the rest of your credit rating, okay, and your past history and so on and so forth. It doesn't automatically ruin your credit rating that you would have one report from a maintenance enforcement officer, or a director in this case, as the bill says. That wouldn't necessarily put you in the bad books in terms of the credit rating agency. It may just be noted on your actual credit record that this has occurred. It may not have any effect whatsoever. So again, Mr. Speaker, it brings me back to where have we gone with this? What kind of thought has actually gone into this? What kind of where has the government, in this case, I know it's a private member's bill, but the government has introduced it, and therefore the government is supporting it, and why? What kind of research, whatever the case has been, has the government done on this? And again, it brings me back to my original point, Mr. Speaker, as to why the government is actually supporting this bill in the first place, because the bill itself doesn't carry any weight, Mr. Speaker, or it may not carry any weight. It has no guarantee that it will carry any weight before a credit rating agency. It has no guarantee that it will carry any weight before the actual maintenance enforcement office, Mr. Speaker. So what you have is an amendment to the Maintenance Enforcement Act that has been proposed, and again, it's just, it's left most of us here anyway, in our caucus, scratching our heads and saying, why has this legislation been proposed? Why is it here? What good is it going to do? What benefit will it be to the women and children in this province who are desperately seeking help in this case, Mr. Speaker? And I mean desperately seeking help, because I know in the cases that I've dealt with, they have come into the office and they've said, what can I possibly do about getting the maintenance enforcement benefits that are mine, that have been awarded to me, and what can I do to possibly get them as soon as possible, because I'm in dire straits and I need that help. This doesn't answer that, Mr. Speaker. It doesn't answer any of that. It doesn't answer the question of resources. It doesn't answer the question of staff. It doesn't answer the question of why this legislation is being introduced in the first place, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, I raise the issue that, I know that since I've started talking about this bill, that I've been the subject of much heckling from the New Democratic Party. And Mr. Speaker, I don't mind that. And they've asked why. But they should have asked their member why before he brought in this bill, Mr. Speaker. Before that bill was introduced to this legislature, they should have asked the member for Cape Breton Centre, why are you doing this? And then they should have asked the government and the government House Leader, why are you introducing this legislation? Why are you calling this legislation at this point in time? And Mr. Speaker, I think the answers would be quite evident at that time as to why they're doing that, Mr. Speaker. Now, let the member for Timberley Prospect draw his own conclusions, since he's so great at solving everything else, Mr. Speaker. So he can draw his own conclusions on this one. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, is that this, again, this is not a case, and let me tell you something, Mr. Speaker, this is not a case, as the NDP proudly thumps its chest, this is not a case of them standing up for families in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, because this is not standing up for families in Nova Scotia, not in any way, shape, or form, Mr. Speaker. I think it's a blatant attempt to try Mr. Speaker, to try and do something, but I haven't quite figured out, or at least I'm stopping myself from saying exactly what that is, Mr. Speaker. So, at the same time, drawing those conclusions, Mr. Speaker, to whatever the case may be. Mr. Speaker, if the minister was serious about supporting this kind of legislation, he would put forward such things as give us some statistics on what the default rate is in Nova Scotia on maintenance enforcement agreements. What is it? How many people don't pay their maintenance enforcement agreements? How many people are we chasing around, Are we going to be out there chasing people around and saying, hey, we're going to get your credit rating? Because we haven't been out there chasing them around saying, we're going to get your driver's license. Or at least we don't know that, because the minister hasn't provided us with that information either. So, you know, the minister can bring up legal aid and how underfunded they are and thump his chest about how great they are funded by this province. But the fact of the matter is, I know a number of people that have gone to legal aid, Mr. Speaker, looking for help with maintenance enforcement issues. So, if that's the case, how many people are in default in this province? How many are there? And where are they? And where are they, in what county are the most of them located, you know, and what their situation is? What's the correlation between them and the Community Services Department? You know, are most of them not being treated properly by the Community Services Department? Should they be in receipt of more benefits, of income assistance, Mr. Speaker? There are so many questions that are associated with this bill that are not answered by this bill and will never be answered by this bill, Mr. Speaker. You know, if the NDP is serious, in treating maintenance enforcement issues to this extent, Mr. Speaker, then, as I've suggested, if you want an entire review of the maintenance enforcement system in this province, then let the NDP support that review. You know, let the NDP stand up and say, we support the Liberal Party in calling for an independent review of maintenance enforcement in this province, Mr. Speaker. I think that's a great idea. I think that's something that, you know, the member, for instance, for Kimberley Prospect would support, because he's always so open and transparent. I know that the Cape Breton members over there would probably support it, Mr. Speaker. But anyway, Mr. Speaker, that's probably not going to happen, because what happens in some instances, and I'm not going to get too political, Mr. Speaker, but what happens in some instances is that there's no good legislation for the NDP unless they introduce it, Mr. Speaker. You know, they have to introduce it, and they have to propose amendments, or else it's not good legislation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, it's much like a lot of other Tory legislation that we've seen come before this House. This is a half measure, Mr. Speaker. That's all it is. Matter of fact, it may be right down there with a third. I don't even know if it's enough to be a half measure, because it just simply doesn't contain any substance, Mr. Speaker. There's no substance there. You want to take a look at maintenance enforcement. There are so many other issues associated with maintenance enforcement. There are so many other areas that you could look at other than just reporting someone to a credit rating agency, Mr. Speaker. That doesn't, as I said, it doesn't scratch the surface, and members here, in particular the member for Richmond, have raised point after point after point that there has to be more done in regard to collection of maintenance orders. What did the families do for the 6 months? Mr. Speaker, there's, you know, one of the questions that's raised by this bill itself is that if indeed, and again, it's the 6-month regulation that's in here, what's required when you're in arrears. What happens to families then? Waiting 6 months. What do you do for 6 months? Where does your income come from? What's done? And again, leading back directly to the Justice Minister's statement that, well, you know, I don't know if this is necessary because we may already have the power to deal with this. So it leads to the ultimate question: if you have the power to deal with it, why haven't you dealt with it? Why haven't you done something with it? You sit around on your hands all day. You haven't dealt with the issues of maintenance enforcement. You haven't dealt with a lot of other issues in this province. And I'm not even going to go there, Mr. Speaker, because I'm going to stay on what this bill is about. I'm not even going to go to the other issues, because there's a myriad of other issues that I could start talking about, but you would sit me down, rightfully so, Mr. Speaker. You would sit me down. But I'll stick just with this Maintenance Enforcement Act, Mr. Speaker. That's what I'll stick with. And just on that act alone, if you had the authority and the power to do something and help the women and children of this province, and you stood up in this House and you said you haven't done it yet, you had to wait until a private member's bill was brought in from the opposition in order to even contemplate doing something for women and children in this province? Is that what the Minister of Justice is telling us? That's what he's told us tonight, that he hasn't done anything for women and children in this province, He had to wait for an opposition member's party to bring forward legislation or propose legislation before he would even contemplate doing anything, Mr. Speaker. That's what we're dealing with here. That's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the ineptness of a minister who hasn't done anything, Mr. Speaker. That's what this legislation is about. You know, he has sat here and he stood in his place tonight and he told us that we're doing more and we continue to do more, Mr. Speaker. But he said at the same time we may already have the authority to deal with this. So I'm not sure what this legislation is going to do. You know? So at the end of this session, what's the minister going to say then? In the meantime, women and children are out there and they have arrears regarding maintenance enforcement. They can't collect on it. They can't do anything about it. You're not taking their licenses away. You're not chasing them. You're not going after them. You're not prosecuting them. You're not doing anything at all, Mr. Speaker, the minister in question here, to help women and children in this province. Shame on the minister, Mr. Speaker. Shame on the minister. Because is this all it takes? Is this the best that they can come forward with? Is this what's left at the end of the day in this session, that the best the Tory government can come up with is a private member's bill that says we're going to chase after your credit rating because you didn't pay your maintenance enforcement arrears? Is that the best that we can expect as legislators in this House? Mr. Speaker, it's not a good idea. It's not a good idea. It's an empty idea. That's what it is. It's empty. I would have expected more, as a matter of fact, from the NDP. I would have expected more, because I've seen some of the legislation that they brought before this House, and you know what, Mr. Speaker? It had substance. This has nothing. This leaves an absolute void. And the fact of the matter that the government would even contemplate supporting this and bringing it forward, Mr. Speaker, it leaves me wondering exactly what is going on. At that point, Mr. Speaker, let me move to adjourn the debate on this matter right now, please.
Motion is to adjourn debate on bill number 237. Agreed? Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, could we have the concurrence of the House to revert the order of business presenting reports of committees?
Agreed. Presenting reports of committees. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Absolutely. I'll defer to the honourable member for Glace Bay.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As chairman of the Private and Local Bills Committee, I'm directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bill, Bill number 267, an act to authorize a marketing levy on Cape Breton Island. The committee recommends the bill to the favorable consideration of the House with amendments.
Or this bill to refer to the committee of the whole House on bills. The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, as well, the committee has met and considered the following bills. Bill number 238, an act to change the name of the Cape Breton Family Young Men's Christian Association and to amend Chapter 115 of the Acts of 1886, an act respecting the Cape Breton Family Young Men's Christian Association. And Bill number 239, an act to amend 141 of the Acts of 1925, an act to incorporate the Northern Yacht Club. The committee recommends the bills to the favorable consideration of the House without amendments.
Or these bills be referred to the committee of the whole House on bills. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as chairman of the Committee of Law Amendments, I am directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bill. Bill number 247, an act respecting the, the provision of correctional services. The committee recommends this bill to the favorable consideration of the House with certain amendments.
The whole House on bills. The Honourable Government House Leader.
The House to now rise to meet again on the morrow at the hour of 1 p.m. and the House will sit from 1 until 9 p.m. And the order of business will be most of the stuff that's on the order paper. We'll do public bills for second reading, public bills for third reading, private members' public bills for second and third reading. We'll do private and local bills, I guess, and some committee of the whole House on bills. I think that just about covers the waterfront, Mr. Speaker. I move that we now rise.
Motion is the House adjourned to 1 p.m. tomorrow. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The House adjourned to 1 p.m. tomorrow.